Hello, I'm Halcylion. It's taken us a while to get here, but the trader's stories have come to an end. It is now time for a new chapter in Harold Forrester's life, one filled with blood, gold, and glory, where we have an impossible goal to achieve. Complete dominion over the continent of Calradia. Will we actually accomplish this goal, or is it just a dream? I can't answer that, but we'll see for how long we can keep going and what milestones we can reach before Harold decides he's had enough. But if we hope to achieve our ultimate goal, we must first establish some sort of political structure. A kingdom, or a syndicate, or a mega-corporation. I have been waiting to finally get to this stage for a long time, and now that we're here, let me welcome you to the first episode of Corporate Reports. Our journey started nearly 7 years ago in the summer of 1084, and since then I laid the foundation for my megacorp to be established, but the foundation isn't quite solid yet, and I need to do a few quick adjustments. When I say quick, I mean that on a grand scale. In reality, this took more than an hour, and in Calradia, it lasted for another couple of months. I won't go over it again, but my final preparations from the final episode of Trader Stories weren't quite final. As I passed by Pencannock and Dunglanis, I noticed a high concentration of Battanian archers in the garrisons and, well, I have a feeling I'll go to war with Battania soon enough, and if these archers are to fall in battle, I'd rather they do so fighting for me than against me. I've previously called this method of obtaining elite soldiers quick recruitment, and I already explained it several times before, so I won't go over it again. At the end of it, all 333 Battanian archers were stationed in the garrison of Seonon, along 200 veteran infantry and a few crossbows, and I am amazed by how clean the garrison looks. This is military cohesion, not the mess I've made in the other garrisons or even my own party. Diversity has its strengths, but it makes organization so much more difficult. With this, I no longer have to scroll through a million different types of units to pick up the soldiers I want. I only have 10 different types. Speaking of other garrisons, Remtoil is where I left all my cavalry, along all the veteran infantry from the other cultures, and Uthalaim Castle is the home of the unproven, soldiers who have yet to test their mettle. As I've said, amassing this army took a fair amount of time, and I shan't go over how I've done it, but I will still give you the highlights of my preparation phase. Before I even started working on my grand schemes, I went into my capital on some, personal business. And there I was approached by Radagos, a man I briefly met before my journey even started, and apparently he's got information about my missing siblings and he offered to join me in their rescue. Before I raid the nearby hideout, however, there's one thing I need to do for my preparations to go smoothly. The war I started with the Southern Empire needs to end. Luckily for me, some of their mercenaries are trying to raid my settlements, so I need to get over there and make a deal. Garlic of the Brotherhood, how about we make peace? You're offering to pay me? That's too generous, but I don't need your money. Let me give you 1 denar instead and we'll call it even. This piece enables me to go on the rescue mission and do all that army building I have mentioned, as well as everything in between. The rescue mission was nothing out of the ordinary, just a standard nighttime raid upon a bandit hideout. In here I discovered that my Falx is malfunctioning and I would need to craft myself another one when the time comes. As for the raid itself, I followed standard procedure. I would position my archers behind me, and while they shoot the enemy, I would tank all the incoming arrows with my shield. At the end of the raid, the bandit boss took the hair-brained decision to duel me, and he fell before he could even swing his weapon. Once this was all done, Radagos had his revenge, and my siblings went to the capital, where they would be safe. On my return trip to Seonon, I ran into this group of 15 forest bandits, and instead of fighting me, they decided to join me. And since they can be trained into Fians, they were welcomed with open arms. Another 5 mountain bandits took the same decision not long after. When I arrived to the capital, I picked up my brother, and immediately after, I founded my kingdom, or as I prefer to call it, mega corporation. I am still a merchant at heart. In the process of establishing Halcorp, I also decided to change my banner. The white bear has served me well throughout my trading journey, but it needs to rest. Now is the time of the golden lion. As I established my kingdom, I could choose 4 policies that would be enacted instantly. Sacred Majesty, because all corporate leaders view themselves as gods and want to be treated as such, and I'm no exception. Royal Guard will allow me to recruit 50 more men into my warband, noble retinues would allow another 30 men to join my party, and finally, law speakers grant more influence to charming people such as myself. With these 4 policies in place, I've increased my party size to 270 and ensured a good amount of influence coming my way. As for the name of my company, Halcorp, it's short for the Halcylion Corporation. Our services are transportation of goods, weapons manufacture and distribution, military contracting, and my favorite, property seizure and reallocation, or hostile takeover as I prefer to call it. With all the services we offer, we could have easily named ourselves Militech, but I wanted something more personal. And if we apply our trade long enough, in the future, I will be able to do some plays that will allow me to rule the continent. Once my megacorp was founded, I could organize and lead armies, and because I forgot something of crucial importance, I formed one and called my wife to join it. This part involved some degree of micromanagement as I took all her soldiers, disbanded her party and got her into my own. The thing I forgotten was to take her horse armor for myself, and once we made the exchange, she was sent back out with her soldiers. One thing that drew my attention was how she addressed me. Your Highness, I am yours to command. Allow me to write your will in the pages of history in letters of blood. Now that's some prime quality wife material. Or whatever else you may need. After I sent her off, I also spent some time and money to equip my brother with the finest weapons and armor available in town, because he too would lead a warband with the men that weren't fit for fighting in the capital's garrison. All in all, I had 3 separate parties along my own. Niasen, Chalia, and Yakim would be my finest generals, and the best part is that since they're in my clan, calling them into my army requires no influence. After this was done, there came a lot of micromanagement, which I've already discussed. In a nutshell, I spent my next 2 months organizing garrisons, chasing after lords, buying towns, getting more elites, and reorganizing my garrisons to accommodate the new arrivals. In the end, I decided to only leave the finest soldiers in Seonon and take some of the other veterans into my army. The reason I'm taking random soldiers instead of my elite task force is that I don't yet know what I'll be dealing with, and if I am to lose a battle, I don't want that defeat to set me back an entire decade. I'd also take Chalia with me everywhere I went, because if I manage an army, I improve my leadership skills, and in time I could lead forest bandits down the path of redemption as they train to become Fian champions, elite members of my honor guard. Honor guard sounds too antiquated, let's rebrand it into something more modern. Corporate security. Now it sounds a lot more professional. As I was chasing lords to buy their fiefs, my path took me to the Empire and I noticed Zeonica was under siege. Because my trade skill could use some improvement, I bought some cheap goods from Jalmaris and patiently waited for these Battanian lords to end the siege. When they did, the army broke apart and I could interact with every lord to try to get him to join my corporation, but I'm not yet prepared to have additional clans under my wing. I'd ride solo for a little while longer, and when I say solo, I mean me, my companions, and my legion. Here I sold most of what I've brought from Jalmaris, and the 33,000 I earned contributed another point to my trade skill. If I could get the final perk in trade, I could hire an additional 15 men into my warband, but that's not a priority. After the sale, I went to the Lord's Hall and bought Penkanok from Aeron, because there's a lot of archers stationed in there. The town itself was valued at 2.12 million dinars, but I ended up paying 600,000 less because I sold all the swords I've previously crafted. It may not look like it, but Aeron is about to become one of the richest men in Calradia. It would be even better for me if he were to join my conglomerate down the line. Ergeon, the Lord of Dunglanis and Oster Castle, was also here, and I got the other fiefs from him for some more quick recruitment. I paid nearly 3 million for both of those. My trade tactics would not be as viable if it weren't for that weapon collector paying ridiculous amounts of money for some javelins and swords. What came after this was a bunch of tedious micromanagement I won't bore you with. I already told you the results of this phase. When I was done with everything, the cities had no more value to me and it was time to sell. Luckily for me, my business partner Caladog was quite close. Unluckily, he was on the march with his army and I had to chase him for a couple of days before I could liquidate the 2 cities I bought. 3.47 million received. That's way less than what it cost me, but I got my value out of these towns, and since I can make a ton of money real quick, I'm not that worried about selling at a loss. After this liquidation of surplus property, I took some time to reorganize my legions and then I went all over Vlandia to hire recruits. Tier 2 crossbows offer a cheap and reliable method of holding onto the cities you capture. A fellow merchant told me that after he garrisons 200 of these into a town, nobody even dares to lay siege to it. Whether that works for me or not remains to be seen. One of my last acts before going to war was spending 20,000 dinars buying various cheap goods from the capital. If I lay siege to a city, I could then quickly resupply it, make a profit, and develop my trade skill to its final form. There's one puzzle piece my legion is still missing. Another companion. Since reaching clan tier 4, another position became available and I'm looking for prospects, the best of which is a lady named Zandina the Wanderer. Tactics and scouting, she's good to have by your side. I then equipped her with the best armor available and prepared to go in the Southern Empire to wreak some havoc. I also took the time to craft myself a few weapons to aid me in the war effort. A large fox named Harvester, a smaller fox named Mutilator, and a pole fox which I'd use to pull soldiers from their walls. You'll never guess what my favorite weapon is. I also removed Badur the Knowing from his position of governor to take him as a siege engineer, but halfway towards the empire I realized I forgot to take him with me. By the time I returned to Seonon, he went to have a drink in the nearby tavern of Epikrotea, so I chased after him, only to find out that he's passed out at a table in Diathma. After wasting a few good days chasing the drunken adventurer, we were finally ready for war. Some people go to war to defend their homeland, others for glory, me to take a town and sell it for profit, and build some positive PR in the form of renown. Because my golden path would eventually bring conflict with the Empire, why not take a slice of that pie right now? Everybody's fighting them. So I rode towards the city of Phycaon, which I planned to besiege, but when I got there, my stepbrothers were already in the process of taking it for themselves. I then adjusted course for Vostrom, but that city was also under siege. Eventually I got outside Onira, and before I turned into a trick-or-treater, I decided to formally declare war on the Southerners. It just seemed like the right thing to do. As I was approaching the walls of my future city, an army of Khuzaits led by the Khan himself marched in its direction, but sieging is done on a first-come, first-served basis, and I got there faster. The balance of power painted a grim picture for the defenders. The 300 would stand no chance against my 600, even if I were to launch a bare-bones assault with just ladders, which I wasn't going to do. I was going to drag the siege on and build a whole assortment of fun instruments. Siege towers, a battering ram, trebuchets, you know, a varied diet. Which is ironic because the defenders' food stocks are completely depleted, while I had food for 100 days. As the siege dragged on, their numbers dwindled. Some would pass out due to starvation, others would lose their lives in the bombardments, and soon enough, their catapults could no longer overcome my trebuchets. I built 3 of those before the assault began, and by that time, the defenders lost 50 of their men. This battle shall be remembered as the Slaughter of Onira in the annals of history, because the defenders should have simply surrendered. Instead of doing a rational choice, they foolishly decided to throw their lives away in a battle nobody could have won, not even myself. My trebuchets turned their defenses to rubble, and a wall without battlements does not protect the defenders from the many archers I've brought. We easily breached the gate, scaled the walls, and killed everyone inside. In corporate lingo, I assume this is called permanent resignation. I don't know for sure, I'm new to this. The assault was over within 5 minutes and the city was captured. This pathetic battle somehow rewarded me with a large chunk of renown and influence, and in the fighting I personally fired 15 Imperial employees. 50 of them survived the assault and were instead imprisoned, and some of them would even join my cause. After the assault I was supposed to visit the markets to sell the goods I brought, but I kinda forgot to do that, and by the time I remembered, the town's treasury was empty because several other caravans passed through. But this town is too far from my territory and I have no use for it at the moment. Perhaps Caladog can take it off my hands. But he's all the way over to Botania and it's going to take me a few days to get there. Let's train some militia and station a skeleton crew in the garrison to buy me some time to get to my contractor. But whoops! It seems Caladog forgot who I'm working for and declared war on me. My rising wealth and power must have him quaking in his boots. Boy, did I call it or what? Luckily, I have enough influence to make peace with them and the money to pay some tribute because Botania is the last kingdom I want to go to war with. And I mean that in a literal sense because it's the last one on my list of nations to erase from this continent. Not long after, I also got some good news. Chalia was expecting our second child. After the siege, a lot of my men were wounded, including myself, and we needed to rest for a while. And since resting regenerates your stamina for crafting, we also visited a forge and spent some time crafting hyper-expensive javelins that cost almost nothing to produce. I've gotten glimpses of the far future where corporations like mine would do the same with technological devices. The sight is what qualified me as the sacred majesty of Calradia. As time passed, more and more superpowers declared war on my rising faction. This time it was the Horse Nomads. Fortunately for me, I got the influence to make peace, and fortunately for them, I have the money to pay them tribute. Like I give a fuck. With an endless amount of money, you can do anything, including paying all these pretenders to fuck off, while I build the engine of their destruction. A few days later, I decided to leave my prize behind and seek out Caladog to sell it to him. But in the meantime, Ragea laid siege to it. I wanted to ask, why me, when there's so many other cities for her to retake, but then I realized she must be jelly of me. Nah, that's not the reason. In truth, all the other warlords left a hefty garrison inside the towns they took, while I only left behind several men. It's obvious Ragea would target the weakest link first, but I have an ace up my sleeve. Influence, which I can use to make peace and stop Ragea from taking my city. But influence is a currency more precious than gold, and I'm spending all of it trying to hold on to this town. Is it even worth it? I don't know, but I want to see what price I would get for this town, not that I do it all for the money. This is all part of my play, which you'll see when the time comes. For now, Caladog gets everything I take, as long as he can afford it. But my road back home is long and fraught with war declarations, this time from the Aserai. And I wasn't going to let it bother me, but not long after they started besieging Onira, and I had to waste some more influence. Who hasn't declared war on me by this point? Vlandia, but they will soon enough. There we go, but before I make peace with them, I'll wait for a bit and see if they give me any trouble. In the meantime, let's talk with Caladog and get paid. Or not, I guess. He has less than 1,000,000 dinars in his account and he cannot afford my town, unless I exchange it for Maronath, which is closer to home and therefore easier to defend. So what does Maronath cost me? Onira, some javelins, and 700k. This town would normally be valued at over 2,000,000 dinars. This is not the best deal I could have struck, but it's good nonetheless. And now Vlandians are raiding my villages. They're not a huge threat, but they are a nuisance. A nuisance that got 20 of my men killed. They are annoying, but perhaps I can use this war to my advantage by taking a few of their forts for myself. As I was preparing to besiege Ormanfard Castle, I ran into the army of their third, who was taking his 600 men to besiege Revel, a formerly Sturgian town, now ruled by the Battanians. In this, I saw the opportunity to crush his army and remove a huge threat, so I called my bannermen and reformed my army. 630 versus 660, this should be an even fight. It isn't. Their third fields an impressive amount of cavalry and his soldiers are more experienced than mine. He could easily crush my army right now, but he would take heavy casualties, which would be a setback in his quest to take Revel. He let me go and I decided not to interfere in his business. I did briefly consider making peace with him directly, man to man, and he asked for 20,000 dinars, which is an insignificant sum, but I was undecided, because I wanted to keep the war going for a little bit longer. I also had the idea of following him to the city he's about to siege, wait for him to take heavy casualties, and finally defeat him when I have the advantage, but my lands are undefended, and my villages would be raided by his vassals, so my hands were tied. In retrospect, I should have paid him 20k, made peace, followed him to the siege, and then destroy him. But at the time I was too indecisive, so I let him go and came up with another plan. I would lay siege to Ormanfard Castle and cause some trouble. Before I do that, however, I would have liked to sell Oster Castle to some random lord, because I didn't need it, but as I was chasing for Melodier, I ran into a Vlandian party raiding a Battanian village, and since I had the advantage, I decided to crush the raiders. Cervic's riders caused heavy casualties within my ranks, and I lost 31 soldiers, but the fight was won, and Cervic was released because maybe down the line he would join my megacorp. My numbers were replenished by the Battanians I rescued from Vlandian imprisonment, but they were just simple militia who will never become better soldiers than they are today. A mediocre replacement at best. Because Melodier was nowhere to be found, we eventually made our way to the enemy castle and we began making our siege preparations. As I was building my camp and siege engines, Vlandian lords would show up and wait for reinforcements, hoping to overcome my force. 3 of these lords eventually got the courage to attack, but they could only muster 243 men, which are far fewer than my soldiers, but even though their defeat is imminent, my victory could be Pyrrhic if I'm not careful. I cannot afford to take too many casualties, which is why I have to play it safe. One of my advantages is the high concentration of archers, which can be split into 2 groups and perform the Battalion Shuffle. My infantry, on the other hand, is quite spread out due to the fact that my mounted companions make the unit behave as if they're cavalry. This issue can only be solved outside of combat by assigning my companions to a different group. There was plenty of time to get my soldiers in position. One archer group in front of the other, with the infantry placed behind to rush forth once the enemies close in. Before the Vlandians made their approach, they had their crossbows kill some of my archers, and to their credit, they did manage to inflict some casualties, but soon they started collapsing and convulsing in the snow. Because of that, the infantry saw no other alternative other than to charge, but they too displayed symptoms of extreme arrow poisoning, a known side effect of the Battalion Shuffle. By the time their infantry clashed with mine, only half of them remained. Their cavalry charge took out a good chunk of my archers, but that was not enough to win them the battle. And when I say win, I mean causing me to experience a Pyrrhic victory where I lose more men than it's worth. But they lost 180 soldiers, only to kill 26 of ours. This victory earned me plenty of renown and influence, but defeating 3 lords at once removed 3 threats to my sovereignty, and that's my true reward. And as long as I besiege this castle, more lords would ride to its defense, and their doom. All I gotta do is make sure to storm the walls and take refuge inside once I'm faced with a threat I can't overcome. Oh, and by the way, the 26 casualties that were inflicted upon me were null and void because these lords had prisoners, some of which were made an offer they couldn't refuse. Join my shield wall and take revenge on the Vlandians. During the siege, a lot of lords converged on my location, but they were too afraid to attack. So I had time to order a trebuchet to be built, and when the concentration of red reached critical levels, I decided to launch my assault. Because of no obvious obstacles, we tried attacking the front of the castle, and despite suffering some casualties, everything went pretty smoothly. The siege towers reached the walls, the ram breached the gate, and my soldiers were doing their jobs in an exemplary fashion. As far as sieges go, this one was pretty standard, but for me it was special because for the first time in a long time, I managed to put my falks to use. I climbed the siege tower with my men, but unlike them, I did not rush headfirst into the enemy's spears. I played it safe, only getting close to the enemy when I was about to strike. The Falx is a renowned helm splitter, so I've mostly slammed it down on my enemies. Most of them would fall after one hit. But I was not invulnerable, even a scythe-wielding peasant could have struck me down, but luck was on my side. Wave after wave, my men rushed into the enemy's weapons, buying me time to slice them up with a harvester. It is harvesting season after all. It wasn't long before most resistance was toppled and a few smarter enemies tried to run for their lives. Some of the runners offered a good training opportunity, so not all of them made it to the finish line. In 7 minutes the castle was ours, although 50 of my men paid with their lives and another 52 with a concussion. If I leave this castle now, I'm dead meat, so I'll rest inside, heal my men, and recruit willing prisoners to my cause. When the Vlandian lords scattered, I left the safety of my castle and chased after one of their parties, led by Elthild. I offered to pay her to sign an informal peace treaty to buy myself time for the next conflict. Because I don't need this castle, I decided to chase Caladog once more and sell it to him. The weapons he bought earlier earned him a profit of 4 million dinars, which is more than enough to buy my castles. I could also sell Marunath to him, but I decided to keep it for myself for the time being. 1 more million added into my bank account, 50 of my men gave their lives for half of that. 50 deaths for 500k. That means each of my men's life is worth 10,000 dinars on average. It would seem that's the cost of a human life in Calradia. If that life is dedicated to my cause, because if it's lost in someone else's service, it's worth even less. Maybe this philosophy would attract more soldiers to fight for me. Sell your life to the highest bidder, make your death count. But to make the situation even worse, the soldiers aren't seeing a nickel of this money. Well, they do get their daily wage, but it barely amounts to 10,000, so basically a life per day. That's what my standing army costs to maintain. But this tangent has been going on for longer than I'm comfortable, and with that said, I declare today's episode finished. After the castles were sold to Battania's top dog, I spent a little more time recruiting villagers and reorganizing the parties of my companions. Nothing too exciting, just a lot of micromanagement. As for today's achievements, we got 1 big Battanian city, a lot more elite soldiers, but I lost 1 million. On paper, it does not seem like we've achieved much today, but I am doing a lot of underhanded moves which aren't directly noticeable by a casual observer. But if you've been paying attention, you'll already have figured out my schemes. But I have no more to say right now, other than thank you for your time, and I hope to see you again in the next episode of Corporate Reports. Goodbye now.